I remember we used to tease Brian over his dad. We'd call Brian's dad Peg Leg Pete because he'd lost his leg in the war. And these days I'd shake the guy's hand and I'd want to say, you know, thank you for your service, as they do in America. He was a hero, but we were immature twats laughing about the fella having a fake leg. Brian will tell you a bit about his dad.
And he flew for the Rhodesian Air Force or the South Africans?
South African Air Force. Yeah, he was. When they prepared and he enlisted to go to be trained for the Second World War, he actually wanted to go to the RAF, but my granddad said to him, "You join the South African Air Force because this is the country that fed you and educated you and grew you. So this is the country you defend. You're not." I don't know if it was a Scottish thing that he was anti-Brits, but he was kind of like, no, so you support South Africa.
Right. And he was shot down over Corfu or Crete or something, was he?
Crete. There was I'm trying to think of it's a smaller island. It's right off the edge of Crete there, Rhodes Island. On Boxing Day 42, I think it was. Or 43, I forget the actual year.
In a bomber, was it?
But they were basically doing a recce flight out there. They were looking for a destroyer, a German destroyer. They came across a German gunboat and they weren't going to actually take action because of being Christmas and what have you. But then the Germans attacked them. So that's when, and he was then wounded in the leg. And the DFC medal that he got was due to, they haven't actually looked at exactly how much mileage, but when they flew with a bomber squadron like that, you flew with a lead bomber, who had the navigator in, that did the, plotted the course and the flight and gave the GPS codes to the pilot, etc. And they had one navigator on the squadron. So he had to turn the entire squadron around and fly back to Merzimatru in Egypt, and it was basically for that, staying at his post, bringing the whole squadron back home, that he got awarded the DFC.
Also, we made fun of Brian's mum, who unfortunately was one of these fall-down alcoholics. I'd understand these days, I'd know how to help someone with that level of alcoholism, but at the time we didn't understand what was going on, so she was beer bottle Bessie. I could dish it out, but I couldn't take it when they started teasing me, and they gave me a nickname, Pippi Skyrocket. I threw my fists, and I'd get quite upset if they called me Pippi Skyrocket, but let's not go there at the moment. So anyhow, Johan, so I started befriending him and he started hanging around with us. And he was a very active sort of guy. He was always busy. He always looked like he was checking things out, or he was looking to make a scam or a deal. And he brought a bayonet to school, which he got from his Uncle Baby. Now I have to tell you about Uncle Baby. I asked Brian about Uncle Baby as well.
Remember Uncle Baby?
Yeah, Uncle Baby. Never forget. Remember, we got a whole bunch of money, well, not a whole bunch, but we got a bunch of money together, which we gave him because we weren't allowed into the bottle store, and he was going to buy the drink and hide it there in the sort of fountain near the tennis courts, which never happened. I don't think he ever bought that booze. He just used the money himself, and we were disappointed because we thought we'd got done in by some hobos or another. Yeah, Baby. He actually cleaned his act up. He came off he was a tradesman, qualified. Came off the streets, cleaned his act up, worked, what have you, and then I don't know what happened to him eventually, but he was, when I'd heard last, he was okay, but he must be passed on by now.
So Uncle Baby used to live in the gardens at the town hall. Johan would take us down to the gardens and we'd stand around, we'd go, Uncle Baby, Uncle Baby, and out of the bushes would come this guy. Sometimes he'd have no shirt. I remember he had this sort of denim jacket with fur lining, and he'd come out of the bushes and he talked to us like adults. That was what impressed me. He didn't talk to us as kids, he talked to us like adults. And I found him very cool, and I kind of admired his lifestyle of living in parks and gardens. Of course, he could get us booze. He told us ribald jokes, you know. He told us jokes about women's parts that I laughed, but I didn't even understand what the joke was at the time. But I liked the lifestyle that Uncle Baby seemed to have. And Johan seemed to know some guys in Johannesburg, or Joburg as they call it as well. And we'd get the train over to Joburg and we started dabbling in, you know, more drugs. I can't remember what we were having, but some of them were creating, I remember some of the cough medicine would make your mouth start foaming. You'd be wiping away this thick white saliva, almost like ice cream. Your eyes would be small little pin pricks and be black, and you wouldn't sleep for days on end. You know, this was all going on while Dad probably had no idea, you know, what was going on. Now things really came to a head with Johan after we started hanging out, and we were going to Johannesburg and seeing some of his buddies, and you know, looking forward to seeing Uncle Baby, and you know, getting to know each other more and more. Things started to get a bit heavy at one stage because, and I wasn't there, but along the railway lines in Brakpan and probably the Transvaal are these pods. They call them mulpitties, mad seeds, mulpitties, and they grow alongside the railway line, and they have these dried pods full of little black seeds, a bit like mustard seeds sort of thing. I wasn't with Johan, but apparently, maybe Brian was, we might ask him, but apparently Johan took a couple of handfuls of these things and ate them. And the next thing I knew anyway was the police were over at my place and wanting to know what had I given him, or where had these things come from, what was he on. Perhaps Brian went and saw him in hospital, because I remember someone telling me they went to see Johan and he was nursing a cup of tea just like I am, saying, but mother, what shall we do with the kitten? Can we keep it? Something along those lines, which I thought was fabulous.
You know, well, you saw when you were out here in your 20s, he was, you know, he was a schizo. He was not well at all. But he got into a program. They got him off the streets. They got him into a program. He got cleaned up completely, and obviously on medication. And they got him into, because you go through literally the sanatorium, and then from the sanatorium they rank you. And he ended up in a place called it's called Fitzgerald House or something like that in Berea, and he was doing well, man, very well. We used to pick him up once a month and take him out, and he stopped taking the pills, and then he started going south again, and he ended up back on he reckoned that when he takes the pills, they control his thoughts. I said, who's they? He says the government and the people control his thoughts, and then they tell him what to think. And yeah, anyway, and he ended up back on the streets again in Brakpan. He ended up at Elizabeth's place, in the original house in Anzac, and they felt, well, like all of us, we felt sorry for him. So they thought they'd get him to, because he said, no, you can do any odd jobs or whatever. So Peter got him to paint the roof. He got up on the roof with a 20 litre of paint and literally started pouring the paint, you know, the roof being angled, poured the paint, and then sort of ran with a roller down it, and then stopped over here and went to the other end of the house and started there, and then did a patch here. He stuffed the whole 20 litre up. And they couldn't get him off the roof, and they couldn't get the paint away from him. So they left him up there till he'd finished all. Frankie got hold of me. To ask me if I know if Johan is still alive.
there was a kid round then that told me he'd taken some acid or something, and he saw a sausage dog walk up to a pavement, and the dog stopped the sausage dog, and the front legs walked over and became thin, and then a moment later the back legs followed the sausage dog. And once again I thought, fabulous, that's the sort of high I want. Now at Gladstone Avenue we had a boarder come and live for a while, a guy called Ray. Ray was a Yorkshireman, like Dad, but a lot younger than Dad. He was a baker that started at Standard Bakery, and Dad probably offered him a room to board at our place. So for a while we had this crazy, real tight curly hair, a bit like Mark Bolan, also the goggly eyes and the thick Yorkshire accent. I remember him going to see Void one night, and the next morning I went into the garage and there was his car. He had one of these sort of like a Ford Capri, quite sort of sporty, and on the windscreen was all blood. He'd hit a car, he was drunk, and he'd gone forward and smashed his head on the windscreen, and then of course rushed home and hidden the car in the garage. So those sorts of shenanigans going on. So I mentioned going over to Rusty's that night with my long greatcoat on, my South African greatcoat with my, my cutthroat razor in the pocket, and the moon was above me, and the John Lennon song Stand By Me was playing as I walked past the dam. Well, I got to where Jenny was staying. She was staying with the cousins. Now these were cousins of Brian's, they were the Zurchers. I think that's how I met Jenny, or Rusty, and I felt very cool and very nervous because the parents were out and all the Zurchers were running around. There was another tribe of kids of the Zurchers, and I remember sort of hanging around nervously, and then it was time to go home, and Jenny or Rusty walked me to the front gate, and there was that moment where nerves overtake you, and you want to kiss her, and do you have the nerves? Anyway, eventually I did. I leaned over and I kissed Jenny Blackstock, and it was fantastic. Her mouth was so warm, and it felt terrific. And once again, walking home along that dam with the moon above me and John Lennon and Stand By Me. What a great memory. Now, a memory that's not that great and signals the end of Gladstone Avenue was Dad had taught me to drive the Austin Apache. He said on some of these trips that we took, looking for carvings out in Botswana and visiting the Zimbabwe ruins and all these sorts of places, that it would be useful if I could drive. In case something happened to him, I could drive the Apache to the local hospital. So I learned to drive in a roundabout way. There was this night, Dad had left the Standard Bakery. That was the bakery that he worked for when we arrived, but he had an argument with Barry Blumenfeld, the tall Jewish fella, the fella that we borrowed the car that Mum had died in. Dad had gone as far as he could. He had an argument with Barry Blumenfeld about something. So he resigned, and he got a job in Benoni or Springs, which was a town sort of just out of Brakpan, maybe 15 or 20 kilometres away. And he was on the early shift, so he had to be there at 5 or 6, as bakers do, to get the oven started and get the process rolling. So he would go to bed early. Now on this night, Johan came over, and I don't know whose idea it was, but we decided to take the car. That meant me going in. Dad had the keys next to the night desk where his lamp was, the nightstand. He was pretty much fast asleep, although he did, I think, make a sound when I went into the room, and he might have barely consciously noticed that I was looking for something on the nightstand. I got the keys. Johan and I started up the Apache, and off we went into the night. We drove down to the Brakpan Dam where there's some big ovals, and we drove onto the ovals, and I was behind the wheel. And if we'd have just taken the car back then and left it at that, we probably would have got away with it. But we got, well, I got a bit cocky. So we drove up to where Voortrekker Road is, where it meets the road coming off Gladstone. There was like a market on the corner, like a grocery store on the corner, and we saw some friends we knew from Brakpan High walking, so I dropped the clutch, spun the wheels across the stop sign onto Voortrekker Road when the blue lights of the SAPs came behind me. Red and blue flashing lights, and men in khaki coming out of their car to have a little word with me. And you know, I could barely see over the steering wheel. Johan was in the back seat for some reason, because I remember as they said, you know, would you wind down your window? And tap, 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 wind the window down. I remember looking over my shoulder to Johan to say, what do I say? So they, you know, they put me in the police car. We locked up the Apache and they drove me back to Gladstone Avenue. We had to do the walk of shame. We had to knock on the door where Dad was asleep and turn the bedroom light on. Dad sat up in bed and there were two South African police saying that, you know, did you know your child was driving your car? We've impounded the car on Voortrekker Road. They threw the keys at him. I wasn't charged with anything. Well, that was bad enough, and then having to walk behind Dad. Dad strode up to retrieve his car. It was about 11 at night, maybe midnight. And me walking, you know, 50 paces behind him with him cursing all the way. He never struck me. We got the car, we went back to Voortrekker Road, we went back to Gladstone Avenue. He went back to bed to try and have a bit more sleep. He ended up sleeping in that morning. I was quite surprised to see him home by, you know, 8 or 9 in the morning, and he'd been sacked for being late at work. And he just grabbed a suitcase or a bag and said something under his breath, and he jumped in the car and he drove off to Swaziland for the weekend. I felt about that big. Now, was it that caused us to leave Gladstone Avenue? I think it was, because the next job he got was in Johannesburg, living above a hotel again in Johannesburg and working in like an Islamic bakery, right where the mosques and the Islamic community were in Johannesburg. It was no longer viable for him to live in Brakpan and travel for work, which was what brought about the demise of Gladstone Avenue. And it was all kind of partly to do with me. We had to find a home for my little dog, Achilles. Someone at the bakery had offered Achilles a home, and we went to see the little dog once from the street. I could see Achilles and another dog running around the backyard. Dad assured me that he had a good home, and I could only see him from a distance, and I had to say goodbye to my little dog. So that's the end of Gladstone Avenue, and that's the end of this part 12 of my time in South Africa. I hope you've enjoyed it. I sure did.